Hello and welcome to the 14th annual Kosciuszko Church Spring Symposium. The focus of this year's virtual conference will be security, faith, and resilience in the Intermarium and beyond. Today's virtual symposium is organized by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you are interested in learning more about us, please visit us at iwp.edu. We would like to thank all of our supporters who make our IWP events program possible. To support the work of IWP, please visit iwp.edu/donate. Today we will be hearing from Mr. Pawel Pawlowski on his lecture titled Freedom of Expression, a Double-Edged Sword in the Fight Against Disinformation in Europe. Dr. Pawel Pawlowski is an assistant professor at the WSKZ in Poland. He graduated with a doctorate and a master's degree from the Faculty of Law and Administration at the University of Warsaw, where he defended his dissertation, The European Standards of Freedom of Expression versus Legal Instruments for Protection Against Disinformation. Dr. Pawel Pawlowski also graduated from the Entrepreneurship Program at Babson College. During his studies, he interned at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. He began his professional career at leading banks in Poland. In recent years, he has been a manager at one of the major companies in the TSL sector in Central and Eastern Europe. He was a member of groups researching disinformation in Central and Eastern Europe, CEE. Dr. Pawlowski is involved with think tanks that cover matters of national security and international cooperation in Europe. Please welcome Mr. Pawlowski.
Hello, thank you for the kind invitation to speak at the Institute of World Politics. It is a privilege to join the distinguished forum to discuss freedom of expression, a double-edged sword in the fight against disinformation in Europe. I am grateful for the opportunity to share insights on this critical topic. Freedom of expression has become one of the most prominent issues in public life on both sides of the Atlantic. It's no coincidence that in his first speech after being elected for the second time, President of the United States, Donald Trump, strongly emphasized the importance of freedom of expression, particularly on social media. This issue has also been widely discussed in Europe, most recently in Romania and in my home country of Poland. There is no doubt freedom of expression is at the core of democracy and is described as a fundamental Western value. However, we cannot forget its destructive power. This is why there are justified reasons to restrict freedom of expression. Unfortunately, it is unclear and disputed in which cases this fundamental freedom can be limited. One example is so-called hate speech, which encompasses a wide range of statements and is viewed by many as a modern form of censorship. I would like to focus on a completely different matter that is important from a security point of view. I would like to focus on disinformation. For about 10 years, the proper term disinformation, or more commonly fake news, has become widely used in public debate. For many, it emerged as a new danger and phenomenon mainly associated with social media. Indeed, disinformation exploits new media on a massive scale. However, disinformation in its modern form is more than 100 years old, having been mastered by Soviet secret services such as the OGPU, NKVD, and later the KGB. The strategy and goals remain largely the same. Only the tools and methods have changed to adapt to new technological advances. But what exactly is disinformation? How can we define it? I propose the following definition: the deliberate propagation of false or misleading information with the intent to influence the behavior of specific groups and or populations, resulting in certain benefits for the entity or parties responsible for its dissemination. The technological revolution that has dramatically changed the way we communicate brings enormous opportunities, but it also brings new threats and exacerbates the existing ones. In the past, running a disinformation campaign was complicated. It required a network of well-located agents, front organizations, and above all, it took a lot of time and money. Now, a worldwide campaign can be run with a few clicks. This amplifies disinformation, making it more dangerous than ever. This threat cannot be ignored. Disinformation is not just about minor fake news. Its real aim is not to mislead us on specific issues. It is a strategic concept that aims to change the way we see and think about the world. Disinformation actors want us to be vulnerable to their policies and unable to make proper decisions. They want us to lose the will to act and defend ourselves. At the same time, they want us to believe that there is so much falsehood in the world that truth itself does not exist. The European Union and its member countries have become major targets of disinformation campaigns. Russia has become particularly active since the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Although Russia's attacks are the most visible, that does not mean other actors are not active in Europe. We can mention here countries like China, Iran, and North Korea, as well as non-state organizations like Daesh and other Islamist extremists, for example. The European Union felt unprepared to counter hostile foreign actions in the information domain. I believe the lost Brexit campaign, in which the EU was unable to project a positive image, was especially painful and alarming for European institutions. The EU Commission started with program statements and then tried to influence internet platforms to change their internal policies applied to hundreds of millions of European users. Finally, it acted on a legislative level as well. I don't want to go into the details today, but I want to stress that these policies and legal acts affect freedom of expression in many ways. The tension between freedom of expression and countering disinformation is imminent. Countries where freedom of expression flourishes are particularly vulnerable to disinformation campaigns. Conversely, it is difficult to carry out such actions against autocratic regimes and nearly impossible in totalitarian states. In order to limit hostile actions in the information domain, we will inevitably have to restrict our freedom of expression. We face an important dilemma here. Freedom of expression is a fundamental pillar of democratic systems. Any restriction can cause significant harm to our institutions and public life. It can create new divisions and tensions within our societies. And in that case, it is paradoxically aligned with the strategic objectives of disinformation. At the same time, given how serious the threat of disinformation is, we cannot counter it without affecting freedom of expression. The question is about the proportions, means, and methods used. But what exactly is meant by freedom of expression? What constitutes this freedom? How does it impact the spread of disinformation in Europe? Can it help proliferate disinformation, or does it create circumstances in which we can effectively fight it? First, we must examine the sources. Unfortunately, we don't have time to review the liberal postulates of John Locke and John Stuart Mill or discuss their motivations, which are, by the way, very interesting ones, and they are not as simple as we might think today. I propose that we examine the most important documents. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, addresses freedom of expression in Article 19. Fundamental, broad definition of freedom of expression. However, the declaration alone is insufficient. A binding covenant was needed. It took some time to agree on the specific provisions. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was adopted in 1966. It provides a clear vision of freedom of expression and acceptable restrictions. In the European Union, we should also refer to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Article 11 covers freedom of expression and information. From a European perspective, the 1950 Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms is a document of fundamental importance. The European Convention on Human Rights established a system of international guarantees for private entities, similar to state guarantees of fundamental rights. The ECHR is even considered a constitutional instrument of European public policy. Article 10 refers to freedom of expression. It outlines the conditions under which this freedom may be restricted. The three-part test is used to assess whether a restriction on rights such as freedom of expression strikes a balance between individual freedoms and societal interests. A restriction must be prescribed by law, have a legitimate aim, and be necessary in a democratic society, meaning it must be proportionate and essential to achieving the aim. Because the ECHR operates within a system of case law, its binding ruling play an important role in understanding the expressed rights and freedoms. These rulings apply a dynamic and evolutionary interpretation of the document. Freedom of expression has been given a particularly significant role. I would like to present a couple of important freedom of expression cases that affect, in my opinion, how Europeans can counter disinformation. In the case of Feza and Roy versus France, the ECHR expressed some basic requirements for protecting journalists under Article 10. This shows that protection is not automatic and that journalists must obey certain professional standards. So it gives us some tools to counter disinformation. In the 2007 case Stoll versus Switzerland, a journalist named Mr. Stoll published excerpts of a confidential diplomatic report about Swiss negotiations over Holocaust-era assets. Apart from matters of confidentiality, the case also refers to the manner in which ideas or information are expressed and the author's intentions. Reducing ideas to a scandalous form is not considered a contribution to public debate. Therefore, they are not protected under Article 10. This case also showed that we have some other tools and argumentation to counter disinformation in Europe. Unfortunately, when we mean these cases I want to present to you, most of them can show us why we can't counter disinformation effectively. One of the most important cases regarding freedom of expression is Handyside versus United Kingdom, which took place in 1976. The case describes freedom of expression as one of the essential foundations of a democratic society. Furthermore, the case refers to freedom of expression as a basic condition for progress and the development of every individual. This case established broad boundaries for freedom of expression, covering not only information or ideas that are favorably received or regarded as inoffensive or indifferent, but also those that offend, shock, or disturb the state or any sector of the population. Given the nature of disinformation, given the nature of the content used in disinformation campaigns, this case creates significant opportunities for such actions. In the 1986 case of Lingens versus Austria, the ECHR ruled that Austria had violated Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights when it convicted a journalist for criticizing a politician. The court emphasized the importance of freedom of expression, particularly in political discourse, and stated that public figures must tolerate broader criticism. In the 2017 case Orlovskaya Iskra versus Russia, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia had violated Article 10 of the ECHR by penalizing a newspaper for publishing critical political content. The court emphasized that journalistic freedom includes the right to use exaggeration or provocation, particularly when addressing matters of public interest. In the 1998 case of Hertel versus Switzerland, the ECHR ruled that Switzerland had violated Article 10 by prohibiting a researcher from publishing his study on the alleged health risks of microwave ovens. The court emphasized that freedom of expression applies to minority and meritless opinions as well. This ruling creates a wide range of possibilities for purveyors of disinformation who can proliferate absurd theories and negatively affect public debate. Another case that created possibilities for disinformation campaigns was Salov versus Ukraine, which concerned the criminal conviction of a journalist for disseminating false information about the death of a presidential candidate. The court noted that Article 10 protects the right to discuss and disseminate information even when there are strong suspicions that it might be inaccurate. In the case of Brzezinski versus Poland, the court recognized the importance of preventing the dissemination of misinformation about election candidates in order to safeguard the quality of public discourse during the pre-election periods. However, the court also emphasized the importance of ensuring the free flow of opinions and information during these periods, recognizing the critical role of open expression in democratic process. In the 1995 case Vereniging-Weekblad versus Netherlands, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that seizing a magazine issue containing classified government documents violated Article 10. The court noted that much of the information had already been disclosed to the public or had lost its confidential nature, rendering continued classification as a state secret unjustified. The court emphasized that the information had been widely disseminated and commented on by the media, rendering the withdrawal of the publication unnecessary for the legitimate purpose of protecting state secrecy. This judgment is very beneficial for those who run disinformation campaigns, which often use leaked confidential information or fake it. These few cases alone demonstrates how freedom of expression, as understood in Europe, affects the ability to effectively oppose disinformation campaigns. This vulnerability is one of the justifications used to restrict this fundamental freedom. We are now witnessing the revival of the old concept of militant democracy, which was developed by Karl Löwenstein in response to the NSDAP seizure of power in Germany in the 1930s. Löwenstein concept emphasizes the need for democratic system to actively defend themselves against anti-democratic forces. He argued that democracies must limit certain freedoms such as freedom of expression and freedom of association, when these freedoms are exploited to undermine democratic principles. This approach is currently very popular in the EU. For example, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk openly referred to it as the inspiration for his actions against the right-wing opposition in Poland. At the same time, there is a completely different attitude that may be more popular on the western side of the Atlantic. The marketplace of ideas is a concept that suggests the free and open exchange of ideas leads to the discovery of truth. Rooted in the writings of John Stuart Mill or John Milton, and later articulated by Justice Holmes, this concept argues that competition among ideas allows the best and most accurate ones to prevail, thereby benefiting society. In Whitney versus California, we can see an interesting perspective on addressing harmful ideas with more freedom rather than suppression. It is argued here that the remedy for harmful speech is more speech, not silence, emphasizing the role of free expression in countering falsehoods and fostering informed public debate. This approach highlights the belief in the self-correcting nature of open discourse in a democratic society. Within EU institutions in Europe, there is a prevailing approach that views restrictions on freedom of expression as necessary to prevent the spread of disinformation. Supporters of this approach argue that such measures aim to protect democratic values, public safety, and the rights of others. However, this model sparks debate about the balance between safeguarding society and preserving fundamental civil rights, including freedom of expression. The European approach emphasizes restrictions on freedom of expression to combat disinformation. This approach contrasts sharply with the discourse on free speech that gained prominence in the United States, especially after Donald Trump's election. During this time, the US saw a resurgence of arguments advocating minimal restrictions, based on the idea that the best response to harmful speech is more speech. Rooted in the tradition of the First Amendment, this approach prioritizes the marketplace of ideas, trusting open debate to counterfact falsehoods, rather than relying on government-imposed limits. Which approach will prevail in the West? Only the time will tell us which approach will prevail in the West in general and in Europe in particular. I will leave you with that question and thank you for your attention. I am, of course, very open for your questions. Thank you very much.